So we have another non-Polish speaker, very interesting man, good friend. His name is Federico Fernández. He comes originally from Argentina, and I say that he's a man of Renaissance. He has so many interests and so many actually tasks, projects, and so on and so forth. This one guy is citizen of Argentina. He works. He has his own think tank in Argentina. It's called Fundación Bases. He is also head of the Innovation Alliance in Latin America called Somos Innovación. He is, same time, employed, and he works as a manager at Austrian Economics Center in Vienna, in Austria. And he also lives by day in Poland, where he has his dear wife. And he's learning Polish culture, and we meet him quite often, and we always love it. So Federico will tell you about innovation, entrepreneurship, all these hot topics that we want to dig into here at Miltonalia event. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, I had a small PowerPoint presentation.
Right.
I don't know how to put it.
I will.
I'll start. Well, firstly, it's a great pleasure to be with you today. Sorry, I don't speak Polish. That's why you haven't seen me all the time here, because I literally can't understand anything or almost anything. In any case, I'm very happy to be here. It's a great honor. I'm very thankful to Jacek for organizing this event. Well, a team of people, and for inviting me. And what I want to talk to you today is about innovation and its relationship with regulation. And sorry that two words sound so similar, even though they are not the same, definitely. And see what we can do about it, and the impact that it has for our ideas, maybe later. Before that, and sorry, I'll show you the image before when I have it. I want to do a little bit detour of propaganda. I want to invite you all. I think Jacek mentioned it in his very kind introduction of me. From November the 3rd to November the 5th in Austria, in Vienna, we are organizing the 10th International Conference, the Austrian School of Economics in the 21st Century. It's going to happen in person, offline, no Zoom, no live stream. We either going to do it in person or we want to do it. We have very good keynote speakers confirmed. Jeff Booth from Canada, Hannes Gisurarsson from Iceland, Mark Skousen from the US, Agnieszka Płonka from Poland, she'll be there as well. And there's still an open call for papers. You can send a paper if you want. Can I have the presentation? I think Jacek sent you.
I got it.
Not this
Okay.
year.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. There's an open call for papers still, and also you can participate as an attendee if you want to come. All the information is at austrianconference.org, or you can ask me here. I'll be here all night until tomorrow early in the morning. So I hope I see most of you, if not all of you, there. Open the PDF, that usually works better. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, Mrs. wearing the number 10 T-shirt. I think that this is unbelievable. Anyway, well, austrianconference.org if you want to know more, and I hope I can see you there. I don't know where to position myself. Okay, I think here is better. Anyway, like I said, I want to talk to you about innovation. Don't worry, all my presentation is basically pictures. I won't be bothering you with text or anything, but just, you know, to accompany what I'm saying. Before, like I said, I want to talk about innovation and how it's related with regulation and what kind of environment we are facing about it. Before that, I want just a few quick remarks about innovation. I'm not an expert on the topic. I'm very much influenced by Matt Ridley, by Adam Thierer, by Jeff Booth. So I would recommend you, go read those guys, those are the best. But just a few very quick remarks about innovation in general. Again, very much influenced by Ridley. We tend to think of innovation closely related to invention, and that is not necessarily the case. Even innovation needs probably of novel ideas, novel approaches. What innovators do is that they basically find widespread applications, useful applications for these novelties, and they lower the prices. This is what Ridley says, and he has an amazing point. That's innovating. In a way, and I don't like the expression, but I think it's very telling in this case, it's democratizing the access to these new products, services. That's the work of an innovator. And innovation is so important, I think, because it's basically the way in which we tackle the current problems and we try to solve them. And that is why it's very important to defend it and to protect it from its enemies, unfortunately. We live in a world that, innovation has been celebrated almost globally, with the exception of our good friend Kim there. Probably no country has an official policy against innovation. North Korea probably is the only exception, but the rest, officially at least, they are not against it. And let me, just as a quick, footnote, this is one of my favorite Latin Americans, Nicolás Maduro, the current dictator of Venezuela and former bus driver, even Maduro acknowledges the power of innovation. Back in 2019, not that long ago, he ran a census trying to find innovators and scientists to tackle the problems that the country had, which were basically the collapse of industrial and food production. So, I mean, when even Maduro is trying for innovations and innovators to save him, we can see clearly that there's a problem in the sense that, it's true that innovation is widely celebrated, but in many cases it's basically lip service. It's not, and the reality, unfortunately, is different. And I think this begs the question of who is afraid of innovation and why? And I'm not going to tell you everyone who is afraid, but I think there are a couple of groups that we can easily identify that are afraid of innovation and sometimes can become very harsh enemies of innovation. And the first is established big businesses. I know, and I mostly share what Rand said, that big business is the last persecuted minority in America. That is the case sometimes. I could even say that is the case most of the times, but that is not the case all the times. And many times, big businesses are persecutors themselves of innovation, of disruption, of disrupting companies, and that we have to bear in mind. It's something that unfortunately happens, and it's a factor. For businesses, there's always this fear that technological progress may put you out of business. Some of them react trying to innovate themselves. Others, and we know them, we know many companies that do this, spend millions and millions trying to influence regulation, bureaucracies, and the environment in which they compete to try to level the playing field in their own way. So this is, of course, and I started with this, let's say, because it's not our most common enemy usually. The second, of course, and this is the most humane and charitable picture I could find of politicians, is, if you have anyone better, please let me know, but this is really, I made a big effort. Are politicians, of course. Politicians, I mean, the relationship with, historically, and I'll tell you a couple of examples in a minute, the relationship of politicians and innovation has been tense, let's say. But the problem, I think the current problem is the following. For politicians, from a politician slash bureaucrat point of view, innovation either comes from an unregulated vacuum or generates an unregulated vacuum. And that is the problem for them, because that's, you know, something is out of control. Someone is doing something without our blessing. That is something, let's say, that we, again, that's a very dangerous mentality, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Historically, there have been very funny cases of how politicians, I mean, I'm using the term in a little bit, you know, in a lax way, but have had a very tense relationship, like I was saying, with innovation. Vespasian, the Roman emperor, was very much against any labor-saving techniques because he was worried. Look how humane he was. He was worried that his commons would be bored if they were not working under the sun, you know, all day until they died. King Charles II of England was, I think he even prohibited coffee houses for a long time, for at least for a year or so, because he was afraid that people would be there talking about him and, you know, how great he was. And this has to do again with established businesses. Politicians have a very high time preference, and they become a supporter of the status quo by default, almost. For them, and I'm going to use very clear and a little bit silly examples, for them it's a problem if Uber comes and bankrupts your taxi industry, because taxi drivers still exist today, they have a union today, and they vote today, and the future Uber drivers, they don't know what to do. So why risk it? Better to keep it simple. Last but not least, what I like to call, I think this is a very good example, the militants of whatever. You have activists, and I mean in Europe, in the first world, you have a lot of these people who, I mean, in a way Europe is a little bit of victim of its own success. People have too much money and time and they don't know what to do, so they create fake problems. And the problem is that there are lots of problems, but one of the issues is that the currency of these people is fear, is installing fear in society, and they have been extremely successful in many cases. GMOs is one a very good example, genetically modified organisms. They have created a boom of production in agriculture in America, and I mean the continent, not the country. And they are demonized and prohibited in the European Union. Shale oil and shale gas, the same. Demonized in Europe, a fantastic way of finding oil in other parts of the world. It's the same technology. What has changed is the social environment created around these technologies. I think this is also related to the situation that change is happening so fast, and it's an decentralized change, that particularly if you are afraid, you ask who's in charge, and of course nobody is in charge, because it's a multitude of startups, big companies, entrepreneurs, innovators who are doing all these changes. And if you're afraid, this triggers the do something mentality, and who is the one who does something is always the government. My concern regarding innovation, I'm very optimistic, and I'll also give some tools that I think we have at hand to solve all these problems. But my concern, and I think it's a concern we should really keep in mind, is that the combination of lobbying, activism, techno-panics, bureaucracy and regulation, what they can create is what you could call the Concorde scenario. Most of you are quite young, but that was the Concorde. This was the first supersonic commercial airplane. And I think this picture is very telling, because you see the Concorde behind barbed wire. And well, what I want to tell you, and to tell you what the Concorde scenario is, let's go back a little bit in the history of aviation. The 1960s seemed that they were going to be the start of a golden age in aviation and in commercial flying. A little bit before the 1960s start, 1958, Boeing produced its first commercial jet. It was the Boeing 707. It flew at a velocity of 600 miles, which is almost 1,000 kilometers per hour. By 1969, the Concorde was flying. And the Concorde was flying at Mach 2, which is, sorry, I have to check. It's 1,500 miles per hour. It's more than 2,000 kilometers per hour. What seems that was going to come in the 70s was affordable supersonic flying. And crossing the Atlantic in 2 hours, and literally shorten distances between our cities, between our countries. Today, neither the Concorde nor any other supersonic commercial plane flies. And this is quite sad. The Boeing 707 was in service until a couple of years ago, and a plane from 1958. And it was, until it was retired, one of the fastest commercial airliners in the world. What happened? And well, as you can imagine, regulation happened. What happened, I mean, the Concorde, let's say, we may discuss other aspects, but what happened is basically that in 1973, and I suppose by chance, when at the same time that Boeing decided that they were not going to produce their own supersonic plane, the aviation authority in the US prohibited supersonic flying over American soil. Many other jurisdictions followed the same, and the arguments that were used against supersonic flying were literally insane. Of course, some of them, well, the sonic boom, I mean, it's an issue, but it was. The sonic boom was going to destroy the earth below it. Life around airports was going to be unbearable, and the best one, this was literally said, the sonic boom was going to destroy the atmosphere and end life on planet Earth. So the poor Concorde was regulated out of existence. This is something, this scenario that happened with the Concorde, this is not a joke. When you see really, aviation did like this, like this. 1970, I remember, even at the beginning of the 2000s, the airplanes were more or less the same as in the 80s. I mean, nothing happens, in very few sectors you have that. And this is the power of very bad regulation and of lobbying. And this is something that can really stifle innovation. We are not in 1969 anymore, luckily. And we live, and this is not my idea, in a time where technological changes are exponential. This gentleman here is Jeff Booth. If you don't know him, well, he'll be at the Austrian Economics Conference, but besides that, he has written a magnificent book published in 2020 called The Price of Tomorrow. I think it's one of the most significant books of the 21st century. If you haven't read it, I really recommend you to read it. And he really deals with the concept of exponentiality. And one of the things he shows us, and he shows us using very telling examples, is how our minds have a difficult problem in order to grasp the concept of exponentiality. He uses several examples. The best to me, there are others, is the following. What happens, how thick would a piece of paper get if you fold it 50 times? How much? How tall? If you fold a piece of paper, it's, this piece of paper, if you fold it 50 times, how thick does it get? Like this, 1 meter, what do you think? Excuse me?
Something like the height of from the earth to the north.
No, it's to the sun, and you clearly knew the answer before I asked the question. It's to the sun. If you fool, the usual reply is 8 centimeters. I don't know. if you fold a piece of paper 50 times, it's physically impossible apparently, but if you could fold a piece of paper 50 times, it would reach the height of 149 million kilometers, which would be from here to the sun. Why this example? Because, well, I think this shows how exponentiality is very difficult for us to grasp. And on the other hand, we are living in a time where changes in technology, or changes in many aspects of our lives are exponential, and we really have to take that into account when we think that we can regulate these processes. Without that doses of humility, things are going to get very bad. There is, and as you can see, I like aviation examples. There is a very big, not from here to the sun, but very big literature on so-called market failure. I think it's quite dubious also. I think when we talk about regulation, we should really start talking about state failure, which will probably be much less esoteric than market failures. And regarding regulation, and regulation particularly of the innovative sector, I think we can identify easily a couple of problems that need our attention. The first one, and we've been discussing this during lunch, is that regulation, better said, innovation by definition can never be predicted by existing regulation, because it's novel. And from the minds of bureaucrats and regulators, I don't think it can come what's going to happen in the future. This is very important because, again, thinking of the kind of exponential changes that we see, this is a plane breaking the sound barrier. At certain velocity, I think it's like 1,200 kilometers or so, this happens, this phenomenon happens. And it's very interesting. If you are seeing it from the ground, what you see is that the sound starts chasing the plane. And that is, I think, the kind of relationship that we see today between regulation and innovation. You have something that is going at a supersonic velocity and something behind that wants to catch it, but it's never going to catch it. It's never going to catch it. Regulation will never come before what we can innovate. Very related to this problem is the following, and this has happened in many countries as well, is that politicians forget about this, forget that that regulation does not have a predictive power over what's going to happen in the future, and this. Because they forget this, what they try to do is to force the current regulatory system into things that were never predicted by it. It would be something like using the telegraph regulation to try to regulate Starlink, the satellite internet company that Elon Musk is about to launch. And I hope I'm not giving any ideas. In Colombia, not that long ago, Uber was kicked out by a law written in 1996. In 1996, of course, Uber didn't exist. The smartphone didn't exist. I think the law predates 10 years the coming of the iPhone. So that is very dangerous again, and this is something that we are facing. And the last one, and sorry for this one, I'll have to read you a quote. The quote. I'll read you the quote and then I'll talk a little bit about it. The quotation comes from a scholar named Kalestus Juma. He was great about all these topics of innovation. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. And the quotation says as follows: "The greatest risk society faces in adopting approaches that suppress innovation is that they amplify the activities of those who want to preserve the status quo by silencing those who advocate for a more open future." I think I totally agree with what he says. I think in order to, let's say, let innovation flourish, we have to be more open and tolerant to new products, new business models, unknown futures. I think that's very important. But the other thing, and this is sometimes not taken into consideration, we need to start thinking of more open methods of governance as well. This time is actually different. This business cannot be as usual. And that is something, again, that will demand from our regulators either to step down or have a very big doses of humility before they try to regulate any aspect of our economic and innovative life. And with this I'll start the last part of my talk, and I hope I won't bore you for too much. What can we do regarding this challenging scenario about regulation that we have? And I think there are several approaches. I'll present you some of them. They are definitely not all, there's more. Some are more radical than others, but I think all the tools that I'll be presenting you are quite useful. The first one that I want to mention is the so-called Travis's law, or the law of Travis, or law by Travis. Who the hell is Travis? Well, Travis is this guy. And this guy is Travis Kalanick. He was the co-founder of Uber and the CEO until 2017. He left the company in a little bit of some polemic. Nevertheless, I honestly think that there should be statues of this guy in many cities across the globe. The amount of lives, by the way, FI recently has published a review of a study of how many lives have been saved by Uber. But in any case, I think that there should be statues of this guy for the thing that I'm going to tell you now, and it's this so-called Travis's Law. And again, I'm going to read this. What I'm going to read comes from a book called The Upstarts by Brad Stone, which is the history of Airbnb and Uber, an amazing book. And the law is the following. This was, let's say, an informal set of beliefs that they have. Our product is so superior to the status quo that if we give people the opportunity to see it or try it, in any place in the world where government has to be at least somewhat responsive to the people, they will demand it and defend its right to exist. What was this in practice? And this was done by a very big company. I think maybe we have underestimated what he did at his prime. What this meant was basically that Uber will disembark in a city regardless of what its authorities, regulators, bureaucrats, priests even would think about it. And they will try to impose, just let the people use their product and then use this wave of popular support to get the permission, if necessary, to continue operating in the city. This was done by a private company, a very big company, in several cities, not only in the US, but in other cities in the rest of the world. And I think this is definitely a strategy that we should think a lot about. Very related to this is so-called the spirit of permissionless innovation, and I have found this concept thanks to this guy who is Adam Thieder. I have mentioned him priorly. He's a scholar, he's at Mercatus. By the way, his book on permissionless innovation is a relatively short book and it's available online for free. It's a very good book. And basically, this idea is the following. What should be, let's say, the relationship between innovators and the regulatory bodies? Should, you come with a new business model, a new idea, a new solution. Should you first go and ask for the permission of a bureaucrat in order to be able to put your products to the test? And I emphasize this, prove that they are harmless, or, which is, by the way, this is the precautionary principle, which is very much alive in Europe, unfortunately, killing a lot of innovation. Or, innovation, what we should have is permissionless innovation. Innovation should be, by default, allowed, unless a very strong case can be made that a product or a service is harmful or, I don't know, dangerous in any way. this, I think, should be the de facto view that society should have about innovation. Innovators should be allowed to test their ideas, and we, as consumers and citizens, decide if we adopt them or not. Like Adam Thierer said, if we are constantly planning in order to preemptively prevent the worst case scenarios, what we'll end up doing is aborting a lot of best case scenarios that will never happen because of this attitude. Related to permissionless innovation are what are called the regulatory sandboxes. A regulatory sandbox is a very simple idea. It's a genius idea. That's why it seems so simple, because when somebody came, you say, oh, this is obvious, but well, somebody had to came with this. Apparently, if I'm not mistaken, the first regulatory sandbox was tried in the UK in 2015. It has been tried a lot, by the way, in the European Union as well, and we have to give credit when it's due. And this, what the sandbox is, very simply, is to allow a product, a new service. This has been used a lot for fintech, for new products like electronic wallets and things like that, that were not traditional banks, for instance, to allow them to be put into the test with regulatory oversight, but this means literally with the regulator taking a look at what's going on as if it were an experiment, but not bound by the current regulatory environment that may not contain what they are doing. This has been tested a lot in Europe, by the way, by the European Union and some bodies. There was an expert in regulation. I don't know if he's still here in the European level, if he can correct me or add to what I'm saying. But this has really helped the fintech sector, for instance, in Europe to grow. And this, I think, it's a very good idea, because let's say what helps is to prevent that that innovations are aborted by regulations before they are born. Couple of more things, and I'll be finishing. Sunset laws. Again, something that is so obvious that it's absolutely genius. Every regulation should have an expiration date, particularly when it deals with technology, because of how technology is changing so fast. And this deadline should be no longer than 2 years. What this will help us prevent is that we use a law from 1996 to forbid Uber today in Colombia. I think this should be taken a step further, and not only every new regulation should have an expiration date, but we should also take care of let's say, the mandates of the past generations, because they can become used by clever lobbies, they can become very, very dangerous. Another idea, and I'll be wrapping up, a litigation fund to defend innovators. I remember one time when I went to Washington, D.C., somebody took me to the Institute for Justice, and I was blown away because of what they do. They are a law firm that operates like a foundation. They raise money, they have donors, and what they do is, you are a small entrepreneur that, regulation is basically not allowing you to do what you want to do. They sue the government, and they go to court, and they do it pro bono for you. Why not to think something for innovation? To defend particularly startups that can be eliminated, let's say, that can be aborted before they go into the market because of some bad lobbying or some bad regulation. I think this could be a very positive idea, and we have always, it's really, it makes you desperate when you think how many excellent ideas are being aborted today because of the judiciary challenges that big companies, and the government of course, can throw to small companies. And Uber and Airbnb, for instance, they had the shoulders from the very beginning. Uber was founded by 2 millionaires, by the way, and I'm not saying this in their detriment. They are two very good individuals, but not everyone has the shoulders to support that they throw you, subpoenas and things like that all the time. So I think this can be a very positive idea. what politicians can do, I'll be very quickly, they can do something which is basically change, of course, with their actions, but also change their rhetoric. There are studies, I can send you a couple, that show how the narrative that a politician creates around innovation really permeates the society and can really affect how innovation is socially perceived. So you have to pay a lot of attention when, let's say, politicians start talking bad about innovation and innovators, because that will never take to something good. And last but not least, and it's time for a drink, I think. If we were making a drink, we should always remember, and we should make everyone know that, let's say, if how a society deals, the social order deals with innovation, if it's like making a drink, it should always be 9 parts of innovation and 1 part of regulation, if any. The opposite would be not a good drink, it would be a Molotov cocktail probably, it would be explosive, and it will bring very bad results to our societies. Thank you very much for your attention.